gyms and the fact that they've had to close in the Liverpool City region. But I understand that in Lancashire, that's not the case.
Yeah, it is, and it's interesting. I mean, obviously, I don't know what conversations Liverpool were having. I mean, we took the decision to close soft play centres and not gyms, because obviously in a gym environment, it is possible for people to, obviously because they're all adults, they're able to keep a social distance, and they're able to sanitise gym machinery, weights, etc. when they've used them. Obviously, with soft play centres, because you're dealing with little children, it's much more difficult for kind of that social distancing to take place. So we in Lancashire took the view that gyms could remain open because they could operate in a safe environment, whereas soft play centres couldn't. Like I said, I don't know the conversation that took place in Liverpool, but I am aware of the outcome, that it's the complete reverse of the decision that was reached in Lancashire.
And then, Stephen, in terms of how the deal was finally done with government, because I know, and I'll talk to Geoff about this in a moment, there was some resistance initially to move the county into a tier 3 situation. But from the business point of view, what sort of support measures have you been able to gain from central government in terms of finance packages and so on?
So there's obviously a range of things that are on the table. I mean, there's obviously the things that everybody else has got access to in terms of the furlough scheme, and that's obviously something that's playing out nationally. And what we were able to negotiate in Lancashire above what was originally on the table, which was a £12 million payments, that's £8 per head of population in Lancashire. And we were able to negotiate an additional 30 million on top of that. So that's unring fence funds that we being Lancashire, so all the district councils and the county council can now set up a scheme as to how that money is going to be used. So there's a range of options that we can look at, so such as direct support for businesses, or potentially additional support for individuals through the furlough scheme. So it gives us quite a lot of flexibility in and around that. In addition to the money, I mean, some of the other big ticket items for us in Lancashire is that we are able to have greater control over test and trace. So clearly that's going to be a massive weapon in terms of the fight against COVID-19 going forward, is the ability to have a really effective test and trace system. So that was a key one for us. And we also potentially get access to military support, which just brings in, whilst obviously military support does sound quite a worrying thing, I mean, they bring in expertise, they bring in resources, which again is really important to support us and our communities. And this was a very deliberate ploy, because over the last couple of weeks, I mean, the number of hospitalisations in Lancashire was going up. The cases per 100,000, particularly over 60s, was going up. So these were all really worrying factors that we needed to get to grips with. But I mean, and obviously Geoff will talk about some of the really detailed political conversations shortly, I'm sure. But none of these decisions were taken lightly. We had to weigh up the public health risk against the impact on our economy, and it's a really difficult choice to make. But we think with the time that we had, we've probably got the best deal on both sides of that equation.
Okay, I will bring Geoff into the conversation in one moment, but just final point to you, Stephen, at this point. In terms of timescales, have the government indicated how this will be reviewed?
Yeah, so one of the key things with regard to going into tier 3, certainly into the tier 3 that Lancashire's gone in, it has a sunset clause. So 28 days time, it will drop off. And so at that point, or slightly in advance of that point, there'd have to be another conversation as to where they should be extended. So, again, really clear, didn't want to get into a situation where there was no end date and it would kind of go on indefinitely. So there's a very clear break date in 28 days time. By which point either we will have to continue with this, or we'll have to remove it or do something different. But it just gives everyone a clear date by which we've all got to sit down again and have another conversation. And I think that's really, really important for confidence in business, as well as for our residents knowing where they're going.
And presumably, Stephen, that'll be based on the figures, will it? Just in terms of what infection rates, hospitalisations, what will it count?
I mean, there's three things that the government seem to be using in terms of the decision making around this. I mean, obviously everyone talks about the R rate, but for me that's kind of a secondary consideration, because there's quite a lag around the R rate. The three things that they're looking at is hospitalisation, clearly impact on the NHS and its ability to deal with increased hospitalisations. One of the three factors. The case rate per 100,000, particularly over 60s, is obviously a key factor. Then the third one is the positivity rate. So that's the percentage of tests that you administer in a particular area, how many of those are positive. Now, the higher the number of positive tests per total number of tests that you administer suggests, given that not everyone will be getting tested for various reasons, that the overall infection rate will be up. So if those three areas are going in the wrong direction, then there's clearly an issue that needs to be dealt with within Lancashire. You know, we were going the wrong way on those particular measures, so someone somewhere had to intervene.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. Geoff, lovely to see you. I think this is the first time I've seen you since lockdown back in March. We managed to get a meeting in just before, I think. I've noticed you've still not been keeping out of trouble, but more of that a bit later on, perhaps. In terms of the conversations that were taking place with the government, you expressed some concern about Lancashire moving into this new situation. So tell us how those conversations developed, Geoff.
Well, yeah, thanks, Frank. It's good to see you too. The starting point with the negotiations, it's important to remember, was, as Stephen just said then, there's £8 per head on the table, £12 million for us. And then all of the hospitality sector was up for closing. So we negotiated our way around that. And that's why we've got a different situation between us and Liverpool, because obviously different priorities came out. We felt very strongly that gyms and leisure centres should be open, because not only are they vital for a lot of people's physical health and well-being, but they're also vital for a lot of people's mental health and well-being. So provided we can monitor them and make sure that they are COVID safe, and we convinced the government that we could do that, we were able to keep the gyms and leisure centres open. But the price for doing that was that we couldn't keep everything else open. There'd got to be a balance in terms of what the medics are saying, where the infection spread and how best we can control it. And then, of course, as Stephen said, we actually negotiated another 30 million with £20 per head, which will go towards helping businesses and perhaps as importantly, if not more importantly, those people who are going to be furloughed in the businesses. Because I think we all recognise, don't we, that a lot of the people who are going to be furloughed are at or just above the minimum wage. And if they suddenly find themselves only having 2/3 of their income, they're not going to find it easy to manage. And we've got to step into that space in terms of advice, where they can get other income from, and indeed perhaps even put in some of our own cash in. So that's what we managed to do. It wasn't easy. Not everybody agreed all the time, but eventually we came to that compromise and pushed for it. But I think the important thing to stress here, it's always a balance between the economy and lives. And at the moment, because of the really serious situation in Lancashire, the balance has got to be on saving lives at this moment in time. Stephen said there's a sunset clause in the deal, and in 4 weeks' time it will lapse. Now, it might be replaced by something similar, something very different. We'll have to see how we get there. But that is the situation at the minute. And we recognise the measures we're taking in themselves will not get the virus under control. We are going to have to take other measures, and that's what we're looking at now to see how we can supplement the measures that are already being taken.
I was just going to come to that point, Geoff, and say that, you know, one of the problems that has arisen in Greater Manchester, and I should point out, you know, this isn't a party political issue. There's Conservative MPs and Conservative councils in Greater Manchester as well who have not really been convinced by the government's approach in terms of putting towns, cities, regions into tier 3. Were they able to provide you with any comfort, any evidence that tier 3 will lead to a reduction, or, as you say, you're having to look at other measures to assist as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, it's a good point, Frank, and it's a bit of both, really. There is no medical evidence that closing the pubs and bars will get the virus under control, because there's no evidence that that's where the infection is spreading. And the reason there's no evidence is because we haven't been here before, so we've nothing to fall back on. But I mean, your own observation tells you that if you get literally hundreds of people milling together when they've all had a drink or two and hugging and what have you. Your own common sense tells you that you don't need too many people in there to be infectious, maybe asymptomatic but infectious. They're going to pass it on. And I listened very carefully to Joe Anderson, the Liverpool city mayor, who I mean, Joe and I get on very well, and of course, very sadly, he lost his own brother to COVID at the end of last week. But Joe actually commented on the behaviour of many people in the streets after the pubs had closed. He said it's a shame on our city, and I think that's what we've got. We've got to get everybody singing from the same hymn sheet, recognising this is a really serious issue, and it's not going to go away unless we all pull together and we all just do that little bit to make sure that we're complying with the regulations.
I think one of the criticisms that has been made, Geoff, and some of this has come out even during our short conversation, is that lack of clarity around rules. And, you run a big, diverse county, and so, you're having to communicate messages to a swathe there of people who all live in different circumstances, different areas, different challenges. And simple messaging is something I think that's gone missing here. So I think, social distancing, wash your hands, keep space, all those sort of things, which I think we'd all agree are just common sense and we can all abide by. I think where this has started to go wrong is the contradictions that people have, at least in their own heads. And when you start saying to people, for example, well, you can go to a gym in Lancashire, but you can't go to a gym in Liverpool. And you're saying to kids, well, you can go to school all day with those people, but you can't go and visit your mate who you're in school with all day at the end of the day. It then starts to be difficult, I think, for people to follow the rules that they don't really understand or perhaps don't believe in. Did you have any conversations about messaging and communication? Because again, I'd say to you, Geoff, I think we get this better at a local level rather than national campaigns.
No, you're absolutely right, Frank. Communications is key, and it was one of the ways we managed to convince government that, well, look, we can keep the bars and the gyms and leisure centres open because of the other measures that we're going to take. But you and I have talked about it before. Once you think you've got your communications right, you do them better because they're never right. You can never get them exactly right. And so we're going to work very, very hard on that to get the message across. I mean, I recognise that it's difficult, especially when you live near the border, if the restrictions are different in the Liverpool City region from in Lancashire. But one of the key factors that, to be fair to the civil servants, they were pushing to us, they wanted us to be able to influence the decisions locally. They were saying, look, your residents better than we do. You know what your circumstances are better than we do. So make the decisions. And I'm in fact, giving a little bit of a secret away, at one stage when some of my colleague leaders were hoping that the government would sort of make the decision for us in certain areas, the senior civil servant said, now, come on, you're always saying you want local government to make the decision, so make it. And if you are going to do that, you will inevitably get slight differences between the different regions. And I think to be able to be involved locally and making the decisions locally, or at least significantly influencing the decisions locally, that's a price to pay. But we need to make sure we get the communications right.
And final point to you, Geoff, before I bring Stephen back into the conversation. You've mentioned getting the balance right between the economy and health. Listeners, long as I've known you, you've been prioritising economic development, jobs and growth in Lancashire. That's been your key priority throughout the time that you've been on the county council. Where do you think Lancashire is at the moment? How much more of this can we take without seeing, a really serious downturn as far as our economic prospects are concerned?
I think we're already seeing a very, very serious downturn, aren't we? We just need to look at the aerospace, which has been a key part of the industrial sector in Lancashire, and it's taken a massive hit. And sadly, Frank, I don't think we've finished. I think the economy is going to take more and more of a hit. But and I don't want to make it sound too dramatic, but at this stage of the pandemic, we have to concentrate on saving people's lives. And the point I make, unashamedly, is that when this mess is over and we can get back to some form of normality, we can get people's jobs back, but we'll never be able to bring them back to life. And what we've got to do is to protect people's lives. And at this moment in time, we're at a tipping point with the pandemic, and that's got to be our highest priority. And then, as you know, we've managed already to make £12 million available of the county council's money on top of what the government has given us. And Stephen and his team are working through what measures we can introduce to help the economy bounce back. And hopefully we can find even more than that £12 million. But we will do whatever is necessary, and we'll be there to make sure that the Lancashire economy can bounce back.
And that's a nice segue into the conversation I wanted to pick up with you, really, Stephen, because you've been working hard on a recovery plan post-COVID. We're all looking forward to the day when we can begin to look forward rather than having to deal with what's on our plate at the moment. What are the sort of big ticket items that you think will be able to secure the sort of bounce back that clearly Geoff and everyone else would like to see?
And I suppose there's a number of things, really, and we've been banging the drum of all of these things for quite some time now. So there is something, I think, a key thing around reopening our town centres and doing that safely. I mean, clearly the town centres are open; they're incredibly safe in Lancashire, but it's beginning to get that confidence back and people actually being present on the high street and spending money. That's a key one. We've got the obvious area of hospitality, which I know has been hit really badly, and I've seen quite a lot of stuff that's been put out there, particularly by yourself and the downtown team around the impacts on hospitality, and that's got to be a key area where additional support is needed. Geoff's already mentioned the aerospace sector, and we've been doing quite a lot of work in Lancashire looking at the impact on the aerospace sector as well as the supply chain, and that's another key area that we obviously need some support. And then the tourist economy. Lancashire's obviously blessed with things like Blackpool and the Ribble Valley, which are massive tourist hotspots, and they clearly need quite a lot of support to help them post this pandemic. So there's a few sort of different things, and we have been in conversations with government from very early stages of this pandemic around some of those issues and those key industry sectors for Lancashire, and talking about how we can open those again more safely, how we can support those industries and their wider ecosystem in terms of surviving this pandemic. And and a lot of those conversations have landed really well, and we're getting a lot of traction with things like Eden of the North, which will obviously be a game changer not only for Lancashire but for the entire north of England. We've been getting quite a lot of support around some of our offer around tourism. So we're feeling quite buoyant at the moment, given up the horrible things that are happening and the massive impact that is having on our economy, that we'll be able to bounce back at some point in the future.
And you've mentioned the tourism industry, obviously the visitor economy. It matters to the UK economy, but for places like Lancashire, it is such a big part of the infrastructure of the county. And we have seen some really good companies go under already. I'm sure that when people are watching this, they'll be hoping that there will be at least some money put aside, targeted at those places that are having to close at the moment. You'll be working through the detail of that now, I'm sure. But anything that you can say that may give them some hope, some comfort as we enter those conversations?
I mean, clearly, you're absolutely right. Those sectors will be foremost in our mind when we start to look at the money that we've got available at the moment. But I think it's important to say it's not just that money. We have previously put a submission into government to be part of the comprehensive spending review. We're constantly lobbying government around additional support. So whilst all the detail will come out in the very near future as to who we're able to support and not in this initial round of resources, like I say, it's important to remember that this is hopefully only a small part of the total support package that Lancashire will receive. And clearly, when we do get the full extent of the money that we require, the visitor economy is going to be really high up on our agenda, because it is so important for Lancashire and its wider economy.
Now, I know you mentioned Blackpool there. I know it's not part of the administrative Lancashire County Council, but you guys work very closely alongside Blackpool, rightly so. And I know on Saturday there was an awful lot of concern, wasn't there, in terms of the Glasgow contingent visiting the town to watch the Old Firm derby. I assume that because Lancashire was put into Tier 3 on Friday evening, that problem didn't really arise as much as you'd potentially feared.
Go on, Geoff, do you want to? I was going to say, I mean, clearly there was quite a lot of stuff out there in the media, from both sides of the border around travel and particularly people coming down to watch the Old Firm derby. At the moment, the guidance is it's recommended that you don't travel, but it's not actually a kind of a legal requirement as such. So, to some extent, we are still requiring that people do have, adopt quite a lot of common sense. From what I was hearing prior to the weekend, and certainly over the weekend, a lot of people did heed that message. So hopefully the impact was greatly reduced. I mean, I think what is really important, given everything that we're facing and given the guidance and support, people just do need to be sensible and use the common sense. It would be impractical, I think, for the government or the county or any sort of public sector body to have to regulate for every possible circumstance and then enforce against that circumstance. We do need people to behave sensibly and bear in mind some of the challenges that people are facing, particularly people that have been hospitalised or people that potentially are about to lose their jobs or could lose their jobs in the future. And by taking risks and travelling and doing all of those things, you're just compounding that problem and making it worse.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And on the Blackpool situation, as you rightly said, Frank, Blackpool and Blackburn are not part of the administrative county, but in terms of the negotiations we were having with government, it was pan-Lancashire wide. So it included Blackpool and Blackburn as a fundamental part of the discussions. And there's no doubt about it, Blackpool have taken a massive hit by closing the pubs and bars down. And I wasn't aware, you might be aware, but the half-term period is the busiest time for Blackpool, where in the hospitality sector, where they actually take most revenue. So closing the pubs and bars just before half-term comes, it's a massive, massive hit.
You've provided me with the segue again, Geoff. I promise you this isn't rehearsed, but you've talked there about the fact that Lancashire has been negotiated with by the government, and it's included Blackburn and Blackpool in those negotiations. And I referenced earlier, tongue-in-cheek, that despite lockdown, you haven't stayed out of trouble. And there was a little bit of a spat about the potential local government reorganisation that, again, we've been talking about, it seems, for many years now. Where is that up to? Because it seemed to me, whichever side of the fence you sit on, in terms of how you go forward with that whole debate about devolved powers, the government were wanting Lancashire to come up with a solution. I'm guessing that those conversations, at least for now, are on hold. But any progress, do you feel, Geoff, being made in that area at the moment?
Well, we're getting mixed messages, actually. The formal response in letter from Robert Jenrick, the Secretary of State, is that everything's on hold for now. But then informal messages we're getting are that, well, if you come up with a good scheme, it will be considered. As you know, Cumbria, North Yorkshire and Somerset have been asked to produce their schemes. I think the reason why we haven't been asked is there's general agreement in the main that we need to have some form of local government review, but it's what form that should take, where there is significant differences of opinion. And I think that's, how governments operate. They don't want to put their toe into that sort of dispute. So I think they're waiting for that to be resolved within Lancashire. And obviously I'm working on that because, frankly, what's happening now and the fact that we will need to recover when we get through this COVID crisis, that just demonstrates out loud that we need a different form of local government in Lancashire. The present two-tier system simply isn't serviceable. It's just not fit for purpose for the 21st century. So we need to move to unitary local government, and whatever form and whatever geography that has, obviously remains up for grabs. But I mean, I've been in meetings with ministers when both the leader of Blackpool and Blackburn have said quite openly that they're not sustainable going forward because they're too small. They don't have the financial resources or the capacity in terms of officer capacity to be able to get involved in the real issues that they need to get involved in. So we need to move to unitary local government, and the sooner the better. But as I say, we need to get our act together in Lancashire to try and present. We'll never get total agreement. I recognise that, but we do need to get a bit more agreement than we've got.
And we've had this conversation many times, Geoff. You know, if you look across the Pennines, West Yorkshire have now got a devolution deal in place. You've got Sheffield City region. You've got Manchester and Liverpool on the borders here. We're surrounded by these devolved authorities. And I think we are being disadvantaged, not just because, as you've rightly pointed out, the system of governance now is just not fit for purpose for the 21st century, but we've missed out on literally millions of pounds worth of resources, haven't we, that have gone to those other places?
Yeah, we have. I mean, whether we like it or not, and as you say, you and I have talked about this many times, it is clear that the government sees combined authorities as the vehicle for the levelling up that they promised at the last general election, levelling up the economy of the UK. And in the same letter that I've just referred to, where Robert Jenrick says, just hold on for any further local government review, he actually does go on to say there'll be more devolution. And in that same sentence, he's talking about combined authorities with mayors. So, you know, you're right, we've been left behind big time right now, and we've lost out on millions of resources. But unless we get our act together, we ain't seen nothing yet. We're going to be left out even more, especially if Cumbria get a deal, and then bordering with North Yorkshire, if they get a deal, we're going to be surrounded by it. And there's a stark statistic that's come to mind. Lancashire used to be the second biggest economy in the Northwest. We're now fourth. You know, we're behind Merseyside and obviously behind Greater Manchester, but we're also behind Warrington and Cheshire now. Well, we can't allow that situation to continue. We've got to sort it out.
And I've said this often in the past, and it's as true now as it was back in 2010. The Northern Powerhouse needs a strong Lancashire. And we're in such a great location in terms of being able to connect the rest of the North. Fabulous rail links, great motorway network, you know, all things being equal, once we come through this, some really high-end industry sectors as well. And it's a crying shame, really, if we can't get that parochialism put aside and get to a place where we can become a major player in that whole Northern Powerhouse project, Geoff.
Absolutely. You're right. I mean, Lancashire has a big part to play, and we want to be playing that part. But at the present time, without a meaningful combined authority, there's no way we can do it. And I mean, I'm not giving any secrets away when I say that the leaders working together on this latest proposal for COVID was unique in my time as leader. We'd never before sung as one voice, and even then, right at the very end, the unity disrupted, and we've sort of back to the normal situation where everybody's having their own say what affects their particular area. And once you've got that, a combined authority for Lancashire is just a dream. But we really have to sort it out, and you'll not be surprised to hear that I'm using every opportunity to press for that wherever and whenever I can.
But in the interim period, Stephen, you've got to work with what you've got, and I know that you've been, you know, resourcing largely through the county council, the local enterprise partnership, for example, and you've been working on economic development plans before COVID hit. My view, and it'd be interesting to get your comments here, is that all of those strengths I've named could actually put Lancashire in a good place if we can get the message right to government, because it is, I think, going to be an infrastructure-led recovery. I think that's where government is looking to put investment. And we've got great projects potentially in the county, haven't we, Stephen?
Yeah, we have. I mean, and I think it's real testament to some of the work that was done before COVID-19 with the county and a range of our partners that we were able to get. I think the current county is 2.25 billion of pipeline projects that are coming forward and are relatively well advanced. So we haven't stopped on any of those projects. We've continued to try and push those projects forward. And Eden of the North was one that I mentioned. City Deal. The list is relatively extensive. And the challenge for us is to continue to push those projects, and a key part of our recovery conversation with government is to seek support to try and bring some of those things to fruition and see those things actually happen on the ground. I mean, they're massively important to Lancashire in terms of job creation and in terms of perhaps more importantly, certainly from my perspective, raising the profile of the county and making it a much more serious player in the Northern Powerhouse.
Yeah, I think if I could just add to that, Frank, Stephen's absolutely right. But we're fortunate in the county in terms of our financial situation. We're considerably better off than a lot of other local authorities in the country, some of whom are having to issue a Section 114 notice, which is the equivalent of a company advising the stock exchange that they've got serious problems. And some, I'm not going to name any for obvious reasons, but some of them are big name local authorities who are having to make serious reductions in their budgets this year. We're in the position where we don't need to make any reductions in our budget this year, and we're okay for making our budget for next year. So we will be able to put resources in a way that a lot of other local authorities aren't able to do, and you can rest assured we will do that.
The one area that we haven't spoken about yet, which is unusual, is education, because of the great universities that we have in Lancashire, but also, some great FE colleges as well. And if you look at what the Chancellor has been talking about in terms of recovery plans, education, skills and training right at the forefront of his thinking, and I'm sure the government's thinking. I'm sure that you guys have been working with UCALM, Lancaster, Preston's College and others to start to think about and imagine what we will start to need to be required as we see a spike in unemployment, because it's not just young people that we have to be mindful of here. There's going to be a lot of mature people coming out of work, sadly. Again, Stephen, if I may, any particular projects that we've started to work up in that area yet?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to this, really, I suppose. I mean, first of all, you're right. Absolutely. Lancashire's blessed with 4 great universities, and it's got a college sector, I would argue, like no other in terms of its quality and the services that it delivers. We have started conversations in the first instance around obviously managing COVID, particularly amongst our universities, because amongst students there's been quite a spike, and we've seen that sort of happen nationally. So we're obviously working around that, and a key part of our recovery ask to government today and will continue to be is around education, because you're absolutely right, there's going to be a huge reskilling piece, and that's been a part of the work that we've already started to do with Boost and our skills colleagues in the county council to begin to understand. So Geoff mentioned earlier about the impact on aerospace, so that's one area that at the moment is contracting within Lancashire, but we're aware conversely that some of our green energy solutions on the Fylde coast are continuing to expand. So conversations around how we can reskill some of those people to potentially take advantage of those new opportunities is an ongoing part of our conversation. But certainly the skills agenda is going to be absolutely pivotal in terms of the recovery piece. For me, it's not just about saying to government, although this is part of the conversation, just gives us lots of money and we'll just prop industries up. It's about looking at what those industries are going to be now and what they need to be in the future, and ensuring that we're providing a workforce of highly skilled people that can fill those jobs and help the Lancashire economy expand.
Yeah, that I mean, as you know, Frank, the universities and colleges themselves, as businesses, have a massive impact on the economy of Lancashire, and we need to keep them going. One area that we need to be careful of in terms of the schools. As you know, much of the resources that are being devolved down for schools are going to the combined authorities. And as it stands at the moment, we're not the combined authority, and so we're having to sort of push extra hard to make sure that we get the resources, because I don't doubt for 1 minute, from the reasons that Stephen said, Lancashire's not unique in needing to reskill people and move them from jobs that they've been doing into other jobs. And the government devolving funds, they're going to go to the combined authorities, and if we're not careful, we'll be left out again.
And I think that's the area that we've noticed most in terms of that gap of funding starting to emerge. You know, that skills education funding that Liverpool, Manchester, other devolved authorities have taken advantage of. I can't remember the figures, Geoff, but they're eye-watering. And I know particularly colleges have been hurt by the fact that, you know, as Liverpool and Manchester are getting those additional resources, they have to come from somewhere, and it's come from basically non-devolved areas such as Lancashire. So you're spot on in terms of the observation you make. Listen, I know we've got a couple of questions in the chat room that I'll go to in a moment. John Chesworth's placed a question in there. I think there's another one as well. But before I do that, can I just move you on slightly in terms of how we move forward now? And you mentioned that 28-day break clause. We've talked about communications, and we've talked about test and trace. And listen, I don't want to be political about this. No government has had to face in modern times the sort of issues that this one has. And I'm sure we're all learning lessons as we go on. But are you confident now that localities, so in this instance, the strategic authority is Lancashire County Council, are you confident that you are having a transfer of powers that will enable you to begin to help get on top of this thing? Tough question, but I think it's one people will be asking.
No, you're right. We've never been here before, have we? In none of our lifetimes, and so we're learning as we go along. Yes, I'm as confident as we can be, because, as Stephen said right at the outset, one of the significant parts of the package that we've negotiated is more local control over test and trace, and you know. None of we three have a medical background, but we know, don't we, that the key to this, until we get a vaccine, is test and trace, and we've got to get that sorted out. And government made it very clear to us. They said in terms, you know your localities better than we do, so you can certainly play a significant role there, and that is part of the package. And in addition to that, this much vaunted 20-minute test, we've agreed with the government as part of the package that we will be a pilot for that. So and we'll get the resources to make sure that we can do it properly, both in terms of cash and manpower. So yes, if those things come together, which I'm confident that they will, we can see a way through it. But we've a long way to go yet, Frank, and you know, everybody needs to know they've got to play their part.
And logistically, again, I'll just give, you know, I'll throw my 2 pence in for what it's worth. I think Lancashire has always been one of the top performers when it comes to these sort of public health issues, whether it comes to education as well. You know, you look across the board in terms of performance as a county, we've always been right up there, Stephen, haven't we? And I'm sure that's where we'll want to be at the end of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the point that Geoff makes is really important to remember. You know, nobody's really ever dealt with this, certainly not in living memory, a pandemic like this. So we are all learning, but certainly so far and to date, you know, the medical support and public health support that we've received in Lancashire has been exceptionally good historically, and, you know, has been very good through this pandemic to date. I'm sure with greater control over test and trace and some of the additional supports that the government have put in place will help us hopefully move that forward and see us come out the other end in the not too distant future, I hope.
We're all keeping our fingers crossed for that. Right, let's move to questions. Anyone else got a question, please put it into the chat room. This is from John Chesworth. Many businesses have said that because of non-wage overheads, they'll have to close for good. so their employees won't get any of their wages paid through furlough. It seems inevitable that we'll need to create many new jobs separate from the schemes to save existing ones. Are there plans in place to support such job creation? Is there new money from government available to support such schemes?
So I suppose there's a few bits to that. I mean, the first bit, I mean, I've obviously already mentioned the 2.25 billion pipeline. I mean, a lot of that will be around job creation. So there are a number of schemes that sit within that will create jobs that we are funding ourselves with help from government. So that's kind of the first bit to that. The second bit, I suppose, is around the education and skills bit that you already talked about. You know, there is conversations and ongoing conversations to try and make sure that our institutions are upskilling. The other bit, I suppose, is kind of the ongoing conversation and dialogue that we're having with our businesses. So we are quite blessed by having a really strong boost team in Lancashire that work with all our businesses, and they're continuing conversations with businesses around what their skills mix is at the moment. They're talking about where there's a skills deficit in a particular industry and there is an excess of that skill in another industry, how those people can be shared across the piece. We're also talking and supporting individuals around reskilling, setting up businesses. So we're kind of moving that agenda forward on a range of different fronts. But and obviously all of that is underwritten by our continued asks to government for additional support. So I think there is quite a strong package of support that we're trying to put in place, recognising that there will be some businesses that close or certainly downsize, and we're very mindful of that, trying to help people find new jobs and make sure they've got the right skills to do those new jobs.
And John's point is very valid about the non-wage costs, and we made that point very strongly to government and said, look, if these firms go out of business, there's nobody there to service the payroll to pay the 2/3 of those staff who are on furlough. So the government clearly noted that, and obviously in ongoing discussions we need to do some more talking. But I go back to the point we made earlier about the schools, Frank. Any resources are going to come from government for schools are more than likely not to go to the combined authorities rather than to us. So we'll just have to keep pushing.
And just in terms, I should mention, John is the managing partner over at Harrison Drury Law Firm. So thanks for your question, John. And I just wonder, picking up on the point that John makes in a sense there, again, you know, I'm conscious of the fact that we've got strong infrastructure of services there. You've talked about boost and business support, Stephen, and again, Geoff, I know that the Welfare Rights Unit has been operating in Lancashire for a long time now. They're the sort of services that potentially are going to come under some strain, aren't they? And that's perhaps where we need to be saying to government, we need some additional help here, because these people are going to be at the front line and are going to be needed more than ever.
Yes, and we'll push. But first and foremost, we will use our own resources in that direction. And if we need more resources in the welfare rights, if we need more resources in the boost offer, we're in a position where we can make those resources available. But somewhat obviously, yeah, we'll keep pushing government as well. But you're right. That's where the pressure is going to come, and we're going to make sure that they're able to cope with it.
Now, the final thing I'm going to talk about, because I don't want us to be going away feeling doom, gloom and despondency. And I hope, like me, others have gone away from this conversation with some optimism that we are trying to get to grips with this thing, and we will get through it, I'm sure. But the thing that's been really impressive, I think, over a number of years now from Lancashire is, despite those difficulties we've spoken about in terms of not being able to necessarily get the devolution deal over the line, the county has come together in a much more effective way, in my opinion, in terms of its marketing campaigns, getting messages out there about why the county is a good place to do business. And of course, we've got the culture bid that's still on the table as well. I'm hoping that and I'm guessing that I'm going to hear the right answers here, but none of that will be diluted, will it, because of this? We're still going to go full steam ahead because we're starting to build a momentum, and it'd be a shame if we allowed anything to get in the way of that.
Oh, you're absolutely right. We must keep that going. As Stephen mentioned earlier, Eden for the North, we're making sure that what resources are needed there from the county will be made available, because we've got to look ahead. And you know, Stephen said earlier, and we can be quite positive. I mean, at the moment, we're all down, aren't we? Quite inevitably, because we're all suffering from having meetings like this instead of normal meetings where the cup of coffee beforehand and the chat afterwards are almost as important as the meeting itself, and we're all missing that. But I think we can be confident if we all pull together. We'll get through this, and we'll make sure that the Lancashire economy bounces back.
And Stephen, one of the things that we started to do an awful lot of work on, and we've made some big inroads into, I thought, was MIPIM. It's been announced that's going to be moved back to June. The county's still on course to be involved in that in some way?
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, really. We were having conversations last year about MIPIM, and we were kind of relaying back to Manchester just after the bomb, and then also just after the last recession in 2008, when lots of people kind of shied away from MIPIM and pushing their particular economic priorities. You know, Manchester didn't, and I think that we want to take a leaf from that book. We've already talked about having a presence at MIPIM next year. Obviously, it's moved, as you said, so whether it'll take place, don't know. But you know, the team over at Marketing Lancashire under Rachel McQueen, you know, we're still as committed as ever to really pushing our economy. We still think we've got a great offer, notwithstanding everything that's going on at the moment, and we want to push that offer and remind people that Lancashire is still here and it'll be very much open for business when COVID's long gone.
Okay. Listen, guys, it's been great to catch up. Hopefully, we'll do it again soon in much more optimistic circumstances. But I really appreciate the update. Appreciate your time. Keep well, and hopefully I'll see you face to face very soon, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Same to you. Take care.
Cheers,
now.
Frank. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.